How does a nation thrive in complete isolation for more than 2 centuries? What happens when an entire civilization decides to shut itself off from the rest of the world? The story of Japan's self-imposed isolation is one of the most fascinating chapters in human history. Yet few people understand what really happened behind those closed borders. For 220 years, Japan sealed itself off from the outside world in a period known as Sakoku. No foreigners could enter. No Japanese could leave. Those who tried faced death. But within this hermit kingdom, something extraordinary was happening. A unique culture was flourishing. Innovations were emerging, and a society unlike any other was taking shape. Today we're going to take you inside Tokugawa Japan during its most mysterious period. You'll discover why the shogunate made this drastic decision, how they enforced it, and the surprising developments that occurred during this extended isolation. From the elaborate political system that maintained stability for over 2 centuries, to the unexpected technological and artistic achievements, this is the real story of Japan's closed country period. By the end of this video, you'll understand how this deliberate isolation paradoxically prepared Japan for its eventual emergence as a modern power. So join me as we unlock the secrets of Sakoku, Japan's forgotten experiment in national seclusion. The story begins in the early 1600s, a time of great change and turmoil in Japan. After centuries of civil war and political instability, the country had finally been unified under the Tokugawa shogunate. Tokugawa Ieyasu had established himself as the supreme military leader of Japan, creating a new capital at Edo, modern-day Tokyo. But as the new regime consolidated power, they faced a growing concern: the influence of European powers in Asia. Portuguese traders had first arrived in Japan in 1543, followed by Spanish, Dutch, and English merchants. Along with trade goods came Christian missionaries, particularly Jesuits, who had been remarkably successful in converting many Japanese, including some powerful daimyo or feudal lords. By the early 1600s, there were an estimated 300,000 Japanese Christians. The shogunate viewed this foreign religion with increasing alarm. Christianity challenged the traditional power structures and represented potential foreign influence in Japanese affairs. Moreover, they had observed how European powers had colonized other parts of Asia and feared Japan might be next. The Shimabara Rebellion of 1637 to 1638, in which Japanese peasants, many of them Christians, rose up against their daimyo, confirmed the shogunate's worst fears about the destabilizing potential of foreign influences. In response, Tokugawa Ieyasu, the third shogun, implemented the final and most comprehensive isolation edicts in 1639. These policies, collectively known as Sakoku, literally closed country, would remain in effect until 1854. Under Sakoku, Japanese people were forbidden from traveling abroad on penalty of death. Those already living overseas were not permitted to return. Foreign ships were restricted to the port of Nagasaki, specifically the artificial island of Dejima. Only Chinese and Dutch traders were permitted limited access, and they were confined to designated areas under strict supervision. Christianity was strictly prohibited, and extensive persecution of Christians was carried out. The isolation was nearly complete. But what happened inside this closed country during those 220 years? Far from stagnating, Japan developed in unique and fascinating ways. Without the pressures of international competition or foreign wars, the Tokugawa shogunate created one of the most stable political systems in world history. At the top sat the shogun, who ruled in the name of the emperor. Below him were the daimyo, powerful feudal lords who controlled their own domains. To prevent rebellion, the shogunate implemented an ingenious system called senkin-katai, or alternate attendance. Daimyo were required to spend every other year in Edo, essentially as hostages of the shogun. When they returned to their home domains, they had to leave their families in Edo as guarantees of good behavior. This system not only prevented uprisings, but also bankrupted potential rivals, as maintaining 2 households and traveling between them with large entourages was enormously expensive. The daimyo were divided into 3 categories. The Feudal, who were hereditary vassals of the Tokugawa, Tozama, or outside lords who had submitted to Tokugawa authority after the decisive Battle of Sekigahara, the Shinpen, who were related to the Tokugawa family. Below the daimyo in the social hierarchy were the samurai, professional warriors who served as the administrative class. Then came peasants, who were valued for producing food, artisans, who created goods, and at the bottom, merchants, who were considered non-productive despite their growing wealth. Below these four main classes were the ata and hinin, outcast groups who performed tasks considered impure, such as leatherworking or dealing with the dead. This rigid social structure, influenced by Neo-Confucian philosophy, emphasized loyalty, filial piety, and knowing one's place in society. Despite its rigid appearance, this system created remarkable stability and allowed for significant economic development. During the Sakoku period, Japan's population doubled to around 30 million people. The economy shifted from subsistence farming to a sophisticated commercial economy. Rice, the staple crop, became a form of currency. With stipends and taxes calculated in koku, the amount of rice needed to feed one person for 1 year. Castle towns grew into vibrant urban centers. Edo became the world's largest city, with over 1 million inhabitants by 1721. Osaka emerged as the commercial center of Japan, while Kyoto remained the imperial capital and cultural heart of the nation. A nationwide transportation network of roads and sea routes facilitated trade and communication. Financial innovations appeared, including futures contracts, banking, and paper money. Merchant houses like Mitsui and Sumitomo, which still exist today as major corporations, trace their origins to this period. The isolation from foreign influences didn't mean Japan was technologically stagnant. Japanese craftsmen and engineers studied the limited Dutch and Chinese imports and books, then adapted and improved upon foreign technologies. Japanese clockmaking, metallurgy, and textile production reached extraordinary levels of sophistication. Agriculture saw major improvements, with new irrigation techniques and crop varieties increasing yields. Medicine advanced through a combination of traditional practices and knowledge gleaned from Dutch medical texts. The cultural achievements of the Sakoku period were equally impressive. This was the golden age of ukiyo-e, the famous woodblock prints depicting the floating world of urban pleasures. Artists like Hokusai and Hiroshige created masterpieces that would later influence European Impressionists. When Japan finally reopened, kabuki theater evolved into its modern form during this period, as did bunraku puppet theater. Literature flourished, with Matsuo Basho perfecting the haiku and Ehara Sakoku pioneering realistic fiction. The tea ceremony, flower arrangement, and other traditional arts were refined to their highest levels. Education expanded dramatically. By the end of the Edo period, Japan had one of the highest literacy rates in the world. With an estimated 40% of men and 15% of women able to read and write, Terakoya, or temple schools, provided basic education to commoners. While samurai studied at domain schools and private academies, this educational foundation would prove crucial when Japan later decided to modernize. But the Sakoku system was not perfect. By the early 19th century, cracks were beginning to appear. The rigid class structure became increasingly out of step with economic realities. As merchant families grew wealthy, while many samurai fell into poverty and debt, the Senkinkati system drained the resources of many domains. Famines in the late 1700s and early 1800s led to peasant uprisings. And most significantly, the outside world was changing in ways that would soon make isolation impossible to maintain. Western powers, driven by industrial might and imperial ambition, were expanding their influence throughout Asia. Russia began pressing from the north, establishing settlements in the Kuril Islands. British ships appeared with increasing frequency in Japanese waters. American whalers and traders sought access to Japanese ports for resupply and commerce. The shogunate was aware of these developments through information provided by the Dutch traders in Dejima, and through Rangaku, or Dutch learning, the study of Western science, medicine, and technology through Dutch books and translations. A small but growing number of Japanese scholars advocated for ending isolation and learning from the West before it was too late. The final blow to Sakoku came in 1853, when American Commodore Matthew Perry arrived in Edo Bay with 4 black ships, steam-powered warships that demonstrated the technological superiority of the West. Perry delivered a letter from President Millard Fillmore demanding that Japan open its ports to American ships. He promised to return the following year for an answer, implicitly threatening military action if refused. The shogunate, recognizing its military weakness, had little choice but to comply. In 1854, Japan signed the Convention of Kanagawa, the first of several unequal treaties that ended the Sakoku period and forced Japan to open to foreign trade. The consequences were immediate and far-reaching. The perceived weakness of the shogunate in the face of foreign pressure undermined its authority. The emperor, who had been a figurehead for centuries, became a rallying point for those opposed to the treaties. The slogan Sanji, revere the emperor, expelled the barbarians, gained popularity among samurai from Tozama domains like Satsuma and Shur. By 1868, the Tokugawa shogunate had collapsed, and the Meiji Restoration had begun. Marking the end of feudal Japan and the start of its rapid modernization, in just a few decades, Japan transformed itself from an isolated feudal society into a modern industrial power, capable of defeating Russia in the Russo-Japanese War of 1905. The first time an Asian nation had defeated a European power in modern times. This remarkable transformation was possible in part because of the foundations laid during the Sakoku period. High literacy rates, a strong national identity, efficient administration, and a disciplined population accustomed to following central authority. The legacy of Sakoku continues to influence Japan today. The period reinforced Japan's sense of cultural uniqueness and contributed to the ongoing tension between tradition and modernity that characterizes contemporary Japanese society. The experience of isolation and subsequent forced opening has shaped Japan's approach to international relations and globalization. Even now, Japan maintains stricter immigration policies than most developed nations and carefully manages foreign influences while remaining a global economic power. As we reflect on Japan's two-century experiment with isolation, we can see that it was neither the backward feudal society that Western observers initially described, nor the perfect traditional utopia that some Japanese nationalists later romanticized. It was a complex, evolving society that developed along its own path, separated from but not entirely unaware of the outside world. The story of Sakoku reminds us that there are many paths to development, and that periods of apparent isolation can sometimes foster unique cultural and institutional innovations. It also demonstrates how even the most determined attempts at isolation eventually give way to the forces of global connection and change. Thank you for joining me on this journey through one of history's most fascinating social experiments. If you enjoyed this exploration of Japan's closed country period, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell to stay updated on our future historical deep dives. Leave a comment letting me know what other historical periods or cultural phenomena you'd like to see covered next. Until next time, remember that even in isolation, societies never truly stand still. They just evolve in their own unique ways.